Now, we have one of BrightView's more passionate addiction treatment and recovery advocates with us here today to discuss the latest on this important topic. Susan Fish is a regional manager of BrightView's outreach team. As you see on the slide, she's been working hard to help our Ohio teams connect with our community partners and has spent a lot of time in the trenches, including working with the prisons and jails across our state of Ohio. And her commitment to recovery is built on a career in pharmaceuticals. And as a result, she brings a very unique and informed perspective to today's conversation. We're in very good hands today. And with that, I will let Susan begin.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that nice introduction. I'm just going to go over our agenda for today, just what we're going to be talking about. First, understanding the issues of the justice involved and addiction, along with reentry and recidivism and what that looks like. Also, we'll be discussing addiction as a disease and the physical impacts on the body, how we diagnose and treat the disease, and what you can do to help this process along wherever you may be. So let's go to the next slide and get started. Prisons and jails and substance use disorder. In 2024, 1.9 million U.S. inmates were in prisons and jails. And out of that 1.9 million, 60% or 1.1 million suffer from a substance use disorder or SUD. An additional 458,000 inmates are incarcerated as part of that 1.9 million by substance use disorder driven circumstances, like histories of substance abuse, under the influence when committing a crime, committed crimes for drugs, or were incarcerated for alcohol or drug related violations. So when you put the two together in 2024, 82% combined of all U.S. inmates were either had SUDs or were in the justice system because of an SUD-related circumstance. Next slide, please. Reentry, this is another key point. So it's you heard the numbers of people who were incarcerated. A very scary time for those folks is when they are released from the jail systems or the prison systems and sent back out into the community. As you can see from this chart, it's kind of small and busy, but overdose deaths were the second largest cause of death upon reentry. A person was 10 times more likely during the first 2 weeks of reentry to die by overdose. Why this is, a lot of times they're coming out and they go back to their old life. They're not prepared. They've had some sort of maybe sobriety in jail, or, the drugs aren't what they used to be. There are a lot of reasons that could lead to this, but this is a very scary time for people that are leaving our justice, our jails and prisons. Next slide, please. We're going to look at a little case study here about how the SUDs fuel recidivism and what that looks like. So if an inmate with an SUD does survive reentry, they can fall into a cycle of, constant being let go, being incarcerated, just staying in the system full circle. So let's look at this gentleman. We'll call him Steve. I think that's what he's been named. Steve was in a car accident when he was 17, had multiple fractures, surgeries, and was left with chronic pain. Steve's grandma felt sorry for him. It's hard to see a young guy in pain. So she started giving him some of her pain pills occasionally when his pain got so bad. Eventually, Steve's grandma wasn't able to keep up with what he needed. So Steve started buying Percocet from a friend of a friend that he knew. Eventually, again, Steve became physically dependent on the opiates. He started buying Xanax and he started drinking to manage what he now has, withdrawal symptoms. So he's starting to have withdrawal symptoms as well as his chronic pain and his opiate addiction. With all of that, Steve eventually gets arrested on drug-related charges. After he's arrested, Steve loses his job. He does start drug court as part of his, first offense. He establishes sobriety from opiates, but is sanctioned for 30 days in jail due to alcohol and THC use that showed up on his drug screen. Steve was released from jail after his 30 days, and the cycle continues. That's a pretty common situation for a lot of the folks, that those of us in treatment, those of us in the criminal justice system, we all know Steve. We've seen many Steves. So next slide, please. Talk about addiction as a disease. Addiction is a chronic disease that causes measurable changes in brain structure and function. The brain's reward system encourages survival behaviors, meaning the reward system in the brain, it's gonna get what it wants. Illicit drugs, when you take those, it does alter the brain chemistry and structure and hijacks this reward system. This little chart sort of sets that up. So what happens when your body takes, an illicit substance, say an opiate? It goes into the brain, releases lots of dopamine because it's reacting to that substance, but then it settles into the opiate receptors in the brain. So if you keep using, you're going to need more and more of that drug to get the same amount of dopamine. So you use a drug, then the lack of dopamine leads to a craving. I've got to get more of that. How do I get more of that? How do I reach that first high? Do I take more? Do I take it more often? I've got to have it. So there's your craving. Once the craving started, you go into survival mode. Oh, how do I get it? My body, I got to have it. How do I get it? Where do I find it? That kind of mode. After that, primal action. I'm going to do anything I have to get what feeds my brain, what feeds my addiction. So you can see how that quickly escalates someone who has an opiate addiction. Next slide, please. So addiction redefines the survival mode. Like I just talked about with the brain, when the brain is off balance and you're operating sheerly on what that cravings and withdrawal are telling you, you're going to do what it takes regardless of the consequences to get that drug. Cravings are a direct or indirect force pulling someone towards substance use behavior. It just leads you where it tells you to go. You're going to seek that substance. And now the body's involved because, the brain starts it. The body also gets addicted to the drug, and then we start with withdrawal symptoms. So when you don't have the drug in your system, those withdrawal symptoms are due to the body being physically dependent on that drug as well. So it does escalate from the brain to the body. Next slide, please. We diagnose substance use disorders, says by the books. At BrightView, our well-established treatment protocols are defined by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, the ASAM criteria, and they fall within the standards set by the ADA and the Eighth Amendment. So you'll see here in this chart, these are the DSM-5 diagnostic categories for opiate use disorder. There are 4 categories. The first one, impaired control. Opioids used in larger amounts or for longer periods than you intended. Unsuccessful efforts or desire to cut back or control your use. Excessive amount of time spent getting, using, and recovering from your opioid use. And craving to use opioids. The social impairment. Failure to fulfill your major obligations at work, school, home as a result of your opioid use. Persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems that are exacerbated by opioids or continued use despite you're having problems. And reduced or you give up things that are important to you, like, occupational recreational activities. So you're not a good partner You're not a good father or mother. You're not a good worker. You're not a good friend. And you don't care. And everything that used to be important to you, you've given that up. Risky use, opioid use in physically hazardous situations. You know, you don't care where you're going to use. And continued opioid use despite the knowledge of persistent physical or psychological problems that is caused by opioid use. You know, I don't care where and I don't care why. And I don't care what you think of me. You know, just I don't care. That to me is risky use right there. I don't care. Pharmacological properties, that's the fourth one. That's your tolerance, is you need more of that opioid to achieve that same effect. And you keep needing more and more because the effect of the drug is diminished the more you use. That's the sad part. That's the vicious circle of drug addiction. Withdrawal, as demonstrated by the symptoms of opioid withdrawal syndrome. Opioids are taken to relieve those symptoms. I think eventually it goes from your brain needing the drug to your body having to have it because the sickness is just not anything anyone would want to go through. So next slide, please. This, more than ever, we're going to talk about justice-involved treatment in the law. And this, you may or may not, you know, have heard of this, or this may not be something you talk about. I know we're over several states. I think this is becoming more and more prevalent conversation. So if this is the first time you've heard about this, you know, I'm going to try to present this in the best light possible. So more than ever, the justice involved get access to addiction treatment while incarcerated, which is a great thing. 5 years ago, when I started with BrightView, I have seen such great strides in what we're seeing in our justice-involved folks, what is being offered in our jails, what is being offered in our drug courts. This is phenomenal. But the failure to provide medication-assisted treatment, according to this, constitutes deliberate indifference to the patient's medical needs and is seen as a violation of the Eighth Amendment. For those of you not familiar with the Eighth Amendment, it's a constitutional amendment. You know, a big part of it, it deals with incarcerated individuals. It says they can have no exorbitant bails or fines in jail, but the biggest part of that is no cruel and unusual punishment. I know we've all heard the term cruel and unusual punishment. Medical services for the justice involved violate the Eighth Amendment when inmates have a serious medical need. An SUD is considered a serious medical need. Officials, you know, sometimes, like I said, this is getting better, but sometimes they can be knowingly, purposefully, and deliberately indifferent to this need. Multiple legal precedents show the value of beginning patient treatment with SUDs while still in prison. Now, I have heard stories, not recently, I'm glad to say, but heard stories of some of, you know, from patients, from people I know personally, when they were first incarcerated or incarcerated at all with their opiate use disorder, they detoxed on the floor in the shower in the jail. I can't think of anything worse. I'm so glad to say I haven't heard that in a long time, and that's going. But that is what we're talking about, providing medications to patients who need it when they are incarcerated. Can I have the next slide, please? Treatment within the ADA. You know, we've talked about the Eighth Amendment. There's also the American with Disabilities Act. An SUD is considered a chronic brain disease and is generally considered a disability under the ADA. So failure to provide medication-assisted treatment deprives the plaintiffs of access to medical programming. ADA rights are violated if someone has a disability and is denied services or programs of a public entity. So This applies, ADA, this is entitled to, it applies to state and local law enforcement agencies and prohibits discrimination based on disability. So the arguments that what this last two slides shows is there are arguments, legal arguments going on that medication-assisted treatment is a lawful and protected right of incarcerated individuals in jail or prison, and that should be offered to anyone that needs it. Still a lot going on with this, but that is what those two slides are saying. So next slide, please. So more than medication-assisted treatment, comprehensive treatment, like whole body treatment for the patient is what is most effective. And that includes medical support, social support, as well as group and individual counseling to help patients rebuild their lives. Addressing a patient's physical, psychological, and social needs results in better outcomes for the patient. 61% decrease in overdose deaths after reentry. 82% of patients that receive comprehensive treatment continue with that treatment after they are released. Illicit opiate use and other crimes decrease among people with substance use disorder, and the patient's ability to gain and maintain employment increases. All good things. So what this is saying, we talk about medication. Medication is just the thing that allows the counseling to take effect. When your brain is in that craving mode or is in that fight or flight mode, you don't think of anything. I could sit there and tell you you could go through all the counseling. You could sit in counseling for 7 hours out of the day, and you're not going to absorb any of it because all your brain is thinking about is when can I use? How do I get it? What do I do? When can I go? That noise. So what the medication does is allow the noise to subside. So the group, the individual counseling, the case management, all of that can be heard. And the patient can start understanding the things they need to do to change the behavior. Next slide, please. At BrightView, we have lab services. That's a part of it too. Identifying what the patient is using on a regular basis. At BrightView, we use drug testing to identify, diagnose, treat, and promote patient recovery. We use in-house for a higher standard of testing versus rapid results. That's not to say we don't use rapid results just to show what may or may not be in the system. But at BrightView, our toxicology, we send them out. We have 3 gold standard testing labs, and the LCMS is what they call it. And if I butcher this, I apologize. It's called liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. Say that 10 times real fast. But we have 3 of those. What that can do is when our toxicology reports come back, they detect 60 plus metabolites and give a more accurate snapshot of actually what is in the system to what extent. It can go down to the nanogram with our testing. So rapid results can say yes or no. Spectrometry can show you down to the nanogram what is actually in the system. At BrightView, we do not use any rapid tests for confirmation testing. Sometimes, that testing structure is given, especially in criminal, as a punitive monitoring or, be here, be by your phone on Thursday. We'll call and tell you when to come, drop a sample or whatever. That's not the way it works at BrightView. Any sample that we take and send out will be run through the lab, and you will get a very comprehensive toxicology report. Next slide, please. Back to Steve. If we If all things are perfect, and it's a perfect world with addiction treatment, inmates like Steve can reenter their communities, avoid an overdose, and break the cycle of recidivism. So if you look, so after Steve initially, so we'll go back to Steve. First time he's incarcerated. After the initial incarceration for drug charges, Steve is referred to local outpatient care before reentry. He's seen and assessed within hours of his initial referral to BrightView. At BrightView, we see patients from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. And when a patient comes to us, like a new patient, they will see a provider start treatment same day. So very quick access to care there. Counselors help Steve address trauma while his medication eliminates withdrawal symptoms and minimizes cravings. Steve attends monthly doctor's appointments, biweekly therapy sessions, and weekly group counseling sessions to assist with his accountability. And Steve is back to working full time. He graduates drug court. He pays off his court fines, and the cycle is broken for Steve. Yay. Just giving that old Judd Nelson Breakfast Club. Yes. Next cycle, please. So how can we help? And this is something, anyone who deals with someone who has a substance use disorder, you need to consider the stages of change. Every person is in one of these 5 changes, regardless, of where they are in the process. And so to be cognizant of those as you're talking to someone, it does help because they feel validated and you can move up that chain. So the first stage is pre-contemplation. I don't need to change. I'm fine. I don't have a problem. So at that point, you want to build rapport and trust and raise the sense of importance to change. Next, contemplation. I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I'm listening. I'm thinking about change, thinking about doing something different. So you want to acknowledge their feelings and you want to discuss, the pros and cons to them of what that change might look like. Preparation. Yeah, I'm figuring it out. I'm getting ready to do something. I'm building myself up to do that. You don't want to push there, but you want to present the information. Here are your options. Here's the pros and cons. I think this would be good for you. Preparation, get them ready. Action, I'm doing it. I'm in treatment. I'm working on my goals. I am getting out there. You want to offer assistance. You want to be encouraging. Help them plan how to maintain their behavior long term. Yes, great. Keep going. And then the last stage, maintenance. I've made the changes. Now I've got to keep going. I want to keep going. I never want to be back to where I was. So you want to continue your support and encouragement, especially if they relapse. Next slide, please. So I want to say everyone, I'm going to go to the last point on this slide because I think that it's important to remember that a return to use for the folks with SUD, progress isn't perfection, but progress is the goal for recovery. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back a lot of times. People are going to relapse. They're going to, things are going to happen. It happens to all of us, not just with SUDs. I find it funny that this is the one disease state where it's your fault and you are not doing well. It's all on you if you relapse. What did you do wrong? You don't get that with just about any. I can't think of anywhere else you get that where it's completely, your fault. I've heard that 1 strike, you're out, 2 strikes, you're out. No, it takes several attempts to reach recovery and stay in recovery. I don't want to trivialize this, but if I was treated the way I have seen some folks treated every time I gained and lost the same 15 pounds, I just say the heck with it. to heck with all of you. So that's, relapse is part of recovery. Just keep that in mind. So how can we help with that? Motivational interviewing. This addresses the doubts someone may have. Encourage them. Self-determination, positive reinforcement to help them move through the changes. So, you had gotten to stage 5. Now you're back to stage 3. Great. Let's start at stage 3 and get back up to stage 5. Use motivational interviewing practices to help these patients advance to the next stage. For anyone here in the criminal justice, there are nice resources through the Department of Justice that is specific to talking to this population. So I would encourage you to go, look up some of those and incorporate anything that works for you. Can we go to the next slide, please? And even 3 minutes can help. Looking at the amount of time spent with justice-involved participants to reduce recidivism. I really like this slide. I've sat in a lot of really, really good drug courts. Seen a lot of really involved judges, really involved treatment teams, and that just makes your heart happy when you see that. So to judges and specialty court teams, to reduce recidivism, aim to spend a minimum of 3 minutes with each drug court participant. I can tell you a lot of the courts I'm in, it's more than 3 minutes. There's a nice relationship there between the drug court and the participants. It also says it goes up the spending 7 minutes of time with the participant nearly triples the recidivism rate. So you can see you spend, less than 2 minutes, how it goes up to when you spend over 5 minutes with the patient. Every minute that you spend more in one-on-one with that person can reduce their recidivism rate. So that is really important when you are in the drug court process. Next slide. I think we are done and we are ready for questions.
We are, definitely. Yeah. If you have got questions, add them to the chat. We have a few that folks submitted as part of registration. We'll start with those. And one of them is, how do you get staff buy-in? If you're in the justice system, especially, the stigma with staff, seeing that as another form of using.
The old trading a drug for a drug argument. That's my favorite. I have a unique perspective on that. I mean, there are a lot of trainings that you can do, and there are a lot of, groups, and you can have speakers, and, you can do that. As you heard from my bio, I spent 17 years as a pharmaceutical rep. I was a legal drug dealer. Part of what I saw there in those 17 years is I don't think anybody realizes just how much money and time and research and development is spent to get one drug to the FDA for approval. Sometimes it takes years. You're almost at the end of your patent before it's even heard by the FDA to approve. The FDA, I have seen companies, my company, other companies, spend those millions of dollars, do clinical trials, studies, thousands of patients, and it gets to the FDA. There's one tiny segment in some clinical trial that happened way back at the beginning of the study that they don't like, and they deny the whole thing. Millions of dollars down the tube, all that research and development wasted, all gone, drugs not going anywhere. That's how hard it is to get a medication through the FDA. Every medication that BrightView uses to treat substance use disorder is an FDA-approved medication. The FDA has said, we have studied this drug, lifted up the covers, we have looked at this drug from every angle, and this drug is appropriate to be used by our population. And guess what? Some of these drugs The FDA said, oh, it's appropriate to use that for the rest of your life if you need it. And there's no stigma there. We've said it's okay. That's the drug I'm talking about. That's the drug we use. So when you're talking trading a drug that you get off the street, that you don't know where it came from, you don't know what it's cut with, you don't know where it was made, Billy Bob brought it to you, where it came from. So you're comparing this drug to the FDA approved drug. There's no comparison. You're not trading one drug for a drug. You're trading a dangerous substance for an FDA approved medication. That's what I say on that.
Great point. And then actually, since we're still talking about medications, someone's asking here that why do some jails participate in Suboxone treatment, others with methadone? And then we've got folks chiming in noting that they've found that Vivitrol works better than these. I think that's you know, the choice of medication. Maybe you could speak to how that happened.
Sure. Medications, you know, not every medication works the same as every other medication. It's all different. You know, just like here I go back to drug. I sold antihistamines. That's how I got into the drug business. You know, I spent my whole first 2 years in pharmaceuticals telling you the difference between Allegra, Claritin, and Zyrtec. Same thing. Not everything worked for everybody. Some jails and some systems adopt different medications based on different things. I can't say there's any protocol. There's not across. I just feel glad that medications are being offered, and you know there's always room for improvement for that. Can I say one works better than the other? No, that is a decision that is made between a patient and a provider. But if a jail is willing to offer medications, that is a step up from nothing. And what I talked about with detoxing in the shower. So kudos to them for offering. Next.
Okay. How should someone promote community collaboration within the state of Kentucky? You know, has there been, you know, measurable success in those collaborations? I earlier, I'll put it in here again in a second, but I put a example from Kenton County, Kentucky, a very successful program. I think that this kind of also brings up the discussion, Susan, around the changes, you know, state to state, from city to city. You know, they all tend to be different as far as the progress we're making.
They are, and it depends on, you know, what how the stigma was in your area to begin with. And like Kevin said, it varies from state to state, from county to county, from city to city. I have seen it work really well, and I have, you know, cities that are really performing, and they have a great solid network of folks that are fighting to treat the issue. And I have some cities where it's still siloed. There's still stigma. There was an example, and this is one, and it's fresh in my head because I just heard it yesterday. Hamilton County, Ohio, which is the Cincinnati Area Addiction Response Coalition, just had their 10th anniversary yesterday. Overdose deaths for them are down 31% from 2023 to 2024, and down 52% from 2017. So they're seeing a lot of good work, but I have met and talked to Chief Tom Sinan, who was part of one of the founding members of this, and to see where it started and to see where it is. It took a lot of hard work, and it took a lot of going back again and finding like minds that were willing to go again and try again. And so there's no great answer for this one. It's just, I think, you know, what you get, it's like a big tug of war. You know, you've got certain factions that feel like, you know, they're going to die on this hill, other factions that are going to die on this hill, and nobody can meet in the middle. You've got to have those few people that are willing to reach across the aisle, meet in the middle, and try to bring solutions or bring acceptable solutions, and then you grow from there. But as far as a blueprint to do it, there isn't one.
And that actually addresses another question that somebody had asked in the chat. Is there a timeline for that to be offered in all prisons? And unfortunately, as you just noted, it's going to be different in every case. Some areas of the country, some areas of the state, might be further along than others. And it is a shift, certainly. There's another question here. It seems we have minimal success with getting resources for reentry individuals to find employment, even with the many lists of second chance employers that are out there. Is there a tool we can use to help these individuals find gainful employment?
That is a great question, because that is something that's difficult everywhere. I did find something out that there is on Indeed, and this is something I did not know, but Indeed does have a fair chance filter. So for your area, if you use that fair chance filter on Indeed, it will filter out all of your second chance employers. That may help some folks. It's also beneficial if you're working in that area to find an employer that may work with you to hire your second chance employees. I know in our Columbus market in Whitehall, there was a Donato's very close to our center that worked with us and placed several of our patients in employment there. But sometimes you have to ferret out those sources. And of course, the bigger your city, the more options you've got. Some of these smaller rural communities, of which, where I grew up, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity other than, going to work for a friend of a friend or this or that. But I wish there were more opportunities for folks to gain employment, because that is, one of the factors that can lead somebody straight back into active addiction. Is just, I've done all this work and I've got nothing to show for it. I can't even get a job after I've done all of this. So
someone else in the chat mentioned honestjobs.com is a great way to look for.
Oh, fantastic. I'll take all the resources. If anybody has resources to help anybody else, throw them in the chat. That's awesome.
Sure, for sure. Well, and there's also discussions in the chat around, certain medications, and I think we talked about this a little bit about Suboxone, methadone, Vivitrol. And someone else in the chat also mentioned, hey, there's really no magic bullet. I mean, it's similar to what you said about there being the difference between Claritin and Zyrtec. It's going to work differently for different people, right? Similarly, that's why we've got 3 different types of meds. So, we'd love to have even more just to again account for all the different biological chemistries that are out there, I guess. But is there any legislation within any state that requires jails or prisons to continue MAT treatment while individuals are in prison or being released to the community?
Could you repeat that, Kevin, please?
Sure. Yeah. Is there any legislation within any state that requires jails or prisons to continue MAT treatment while individuals are incarcerated or before being released to the community?
Yeah, more and more states are recognizing the importance of continuing medication in the jails and have passed legislation. Of course, it's going to vary from state to state, but we are seeing more and more states jump on that bandwagon to maintain access to MAT before release. The Department of Justice has clarified now that denying medication-assisted treatment to incarcerated individuals, like we talked about, may violate the ADA. We're looking at the 8th Amendment, like we talked about in those couple of slides in the presentation. So it's being talked about more and more states. I look for more and more states to adopt this. I hope more and more states adopt this as they get more legislative pressure to do so.
Well, and you had mentioned a little bit about some of the ins and outs of this. And if somebody is incarcerated, they have not been diagnosed as having an SUD, And maybe based on stages of change, they're not really there yet either. Is that an excuse to deny them treatment?
Do you want my personal opinion or my legal opinion? My personal opinion is no.
You're not a lawyer, so I'll take your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is no. If you would continue to do that, continue to offer, we have choice. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like, but we have choice to do that. We can, you can keep offering, you can keep doing the motivational interviewing, you can keep contemplating, going through the stages of change. There we go at the end of but I think too, maybe trying to present them, maybe offering, hey, we have the opportunity. Would you be interested in doing an assessment, taking a jail assessment to see, if maybe you're on the fence and you don't think you do, if you could get a buy-in for something like that to show that they actually, based on how they answer the questions, they do have a substance use disorder. So.
We only have a couple more here. How can an organization connect with women who are entering reentry or beginning reentry?
Well, women have a special, women in recovery, that's a special system. It's especially important to meet women where they are. A lot of times a woman in reentry is coming back to challenges like, maybe they've got kids at home, or maybe, they could be incarcerated while pregnant. They could have reunification things. Maybe they're working with CPS and doing that. I'm not saying that men don't have those either, but, women as a whole do have a whole subset. How do I if I'm going to get back, this is what I have to do to take care of a family if there's one, or, how do I get out? And, some women are coming out and they don't want to go back into the situation they had with possibly someone who was abusing them or, selling them. Just a lot of different issues that women have. So, I think getting them into a treatment program where those needs can be assessed quickly is very valuable.
So we're getting into some of the medication discussion again. There's some folks, someone's wondering if there's any medication available for individuals that exclusively use crystal meth. I personally, Susan, am not aware of that.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not either. I know they've tried different things. And I will preface this, when talking about the medications, I'm not a provider. I'm not a doctor. So, Kevin, maybe some of these specific questions we could run through medical and they could give a more unbiased, as Kevin said, I'm passionate, I'm biased. I don't feel comfortable, answering specific medicine questions, not having that medical degree, but I would love to present those, take those back to our medical team. And if we've got your emails, we'd be happy to email you many responses from them that could answer your questions probably much better than I could.
This is another one that I'm sure you get a lot, Susan. I know I hear it a lot, but once you start MAT, is it assumed that that's going to be a lifelong thing? Are you?
No, it's not assumed.
Right.
Like with anything else, just because you can take it the rest of your life doesn't mean you're going to. There are different stages, different people react to medications, as we talked, in different ways. A lot of people's whole goal is, I just want to take this medication and to help me until I have the skills and I'm strong enough to get myself off of it and do it. I don't want to take, I don't want to take a medication for the rest of my life. So that just because you can doesn't mean you have to. So I think that for our patients, but there should be no shame if that's what you need to do to maintain your sobriety for the rest of your life and hold a job and have a family and do all of the things that you need to do to be successful. So, that's my take on that, because I don't think there should be shame in either one. If you need it, take it. If you want to get off of it, We can help you, or you can, you can work on that yourself, but let's not stigmatize anybody that needs that medication because the FDA said you can take it for the rest of your life.
Right. Well, okay. I think that is the bulk of questions we have today, but I want to thank everybody for joining us. And if you have provided us with your email and registration, I can assure you guys you're going to get a link to the slides and your individual certificates of completion as well via email. That's definitely going to happen. I appreciate everybody resending the emails in the chat, but we've got them. So thank you. And with that, I will wish everybody a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for giving up your lunch hour to be with us today.